The cacophony of alien voices fell silent as Shane Reynolds staggered into the medical training lab, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body, yet he managed to maintain a grimace that might have passed for a smile on a better day. 27 pairs of multifaceted eyes tracked his progress across the room, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright alarm. "Professor Zix, I think I need to demonstrate that emergency procedure we discussed last week," Shane said through gritted teeth, addressing the tall, slender alien instructor whose translucent skin rippled with bands of concerned purple. "Shoulder dislocation. Anterior, I believe." The Galactic Medical Academy on Proxima Centauri Roman II was renowned throughout the 12 systems for its innovative approach to interspecies medicine. As the first human instructor in the xenobiology department, Shane had spent 3 years teaching alien medical students about human physiology. Today's lesson, however, hadn't been on the syllabus. Professor Zix's voice resonated with harmonic undertones. "Instructor Reynolds, the medical staff can be summoned immediately. Please sit down before." "No time," Shane interrupted, the pain making him brusque. "Perfect teaching opportunity. They need to see this." He turned to face the class of aspiring alien doctors. "Anterior shoulder dislocation, very common human injury. Pay attention." The amphitheater-style classroom allowed all students clear visibility. Shane could see their reactions, the Vexillian spines bristling in distress, the Arcturian twins' breathing sacs inflating with anxiety, and the usually stoic Quasarian student Melix looking like he might lose his morning nutrition through all 4 stomachs. "Instructor," Melix called out, his voice quavering, "our anatomical studies indicate that self-reduction of a dislocated joint without analgesia would cause extreme pain responses in humans." "Your endorphin system cannot possibly watch and learn," Shane interrupted, positioning himself beside the demonstration table. With deliberate care, he lay down on his back. The Stimson technique, effective though not pleasant. The class watched in horrified fascination as Shane dangled his dislocated arm over the edge of the table, letting gravity provide natural traction. "The weight of the arm pulls the humeral head forward," he explained, voice tight with pain. "The key is relaxation, which admittedly isn't easy under these circumstances." He attempted a strained laugh that came out more like a choked gasp. One of the Trelavian students, SB, scuttled forward on 6 appendages. "Instructor Reynolds, I have analgesic compounds in my emergency kit." "Please, this display is unnecessary, and no," Shane said firmly. "In emergency situations, humans sometimes must act without medical assistance. You all need to understand what your human patients might do before reaching your care." Professor Zix moved closer, concern evident in the rapid shifts of color beneath his translucent skin. "Shane, I must insist," but Shane had already closed his eyes, focusing on relaxing his shoulder muscles despite the screaming pain. The students watched, some recording the procedure with their ocular implants, others making distressed sounds in their native languages that the universal translators couldn't or wouldn't convert. "The muscles fight against reduction," Shane explained through shallow breaths. "Counterintuitive to relax when in pain, but essential for this technique." Minutes passed as Shane concentrated on breathing deeply, letting his arm hang heavy. Some students turned away, unable to watch. Others leaned forward, medical curiosity momentarily overcoming their horror. "Almost there," Shane murmured, sweat beading on his forehead. "The humeral head should begin to." His words were cut off by a sudden grunt as he deliberately rotated his forearm outward. With a sickening pop that echoed through the silent classroom, the shoulder joint slid back into place. The response was immediate and chaotic. Several students emitted high-pitched distress calls. 2 Forian students fainted, their gelatinous bodies temporarily losing cohesion and slumping into puddles. Professor Zix rushed forward, medical scanner already humming. Class dismissed. Zix announced, voice vibrating with urgency. Emergency medical protocol now in effect, but Shane, despite being pale and shaking, managed to sit up. "Wait," he called to the retreating students. "This is important. The reduction was successful, but there's more to learn here. Reluctantly, the students paused their exodus. Some seemed genuinely curious now that the most horrifying part was over. Others remained by the door, clearly traumatized by what they'd witnessed. "The joint is back in place," Shane explained, gingerly testing his range of motion. "But this doesn't end the medical event. There's significant risk of recurrence without proper immobilization and follow-up care." Professor Zix had activated the classroom's medical diagnostic array, which now hovered over Shane, projecting his internal structure for all to see. "Students, note the inflammation surrounding the joint capsule. The ligaments show stress patterns consistent with traumatic dislocation." The teaching moment had transformed. What had begun as a shocking display of human pain tolerance had become a valuable diagnostic lesson. Shane permitted Professor Zix to demonstrate proper post-reduction care while continuing to explain the physiological processes to the class. Melix, the Quasarian student who had initially protested, approached cautiously. "Instructor Reynolds, your pain threshold exceeds our understanding of human physiology. Our textbooks indicate this procedure would be unbearable without chemical assistance." Shane nodded, wincing as Professor Zix applied a stabilizing field to his shoulder. "Textbooks can't fully capture the human response to emergency situations. We have physiological mechanisms, adrenaline, endorphins that activate under extreme stress. But mainly, it's about focusing beyond the pain to solve the immediate problem." A rustling sound came from the back of the classroom as Trella, a mantis-like sectoid student, stepped forward. Unlike her classmates, her posture displayed not horror but intense curiosity. "Instructor, may I inquire how this injury occurred?" "Understanding the mechanism might help us prevent similar injuries in our human patients." Shane grimaced, embarrassment now adding to his discomfort. "I was attempting to retrieve research materials from a high shelf in the xenobiology archives. I overreached instead of using the hovering step platform." Professor Zix made a sound that the translator interpreted as a disapproving click. "A preventable accident, students. Note that even trained medical professionals sometimes ignore safety protocols." "In my defense," Shane added, "I was in a hurry because I wanted to prepare something special for today's class on human skeletal vulnerabilities." He managed a pained smile. "Consider this an extremely practical demonstration." The tension in the room finally broke as several students made sounds that their respective species considered laughter. Even Professor Zix's skin rippled with amused pink tones. "I believe, Instructor Reynolds, that today's unplanned lesson will remain in our students' memories far longer than any prepared lecture could have," Zix observed. Vex, a crystalline Lumidian whose body refracted light in constantly shifting patterns, raised an appendage. "Question: do all humans possess this ability to self-repair major joint displacements?" "Good question," Shane replied, settling more comfortably as the medical stabilizer took effect. "The technique itself can be learned, but the mental discipline to execute it varies widely among individuals. Some humans would be physically unable to attempt this due to muscle mass or joint configuration. Others simply couldn't overcome the pain response." "Fascinating," Vex hummed, the sound causing ripples of light to cascade through his crystalline form. "Human medical texts suggest your species has relatively modest pain tolerance compared to many galactic species, yet you clearly demonstrated otherwise." Shane nodded carefully. "Pain threshold and pain tolerance are different measures. Humans feel pain intensely. Our nervous systems are quite sensitive, but our ability to function despite pain can be remarkable under the right circumstances." Professor Zix turned to address the class. "Students, what you witnessed today exemplifies why practical interspecies medical training is essential. Textbook knowledge alone would not prepare you for a human patient who might attempt self-treatment before seeking professional care." The classroom had calmed considerably, and several students who had fled to the doorway now returned, medical curiosity overcoming their initial shock. Melix approached with a diagnostic scanner of his own. "Instructor, with your permission, I would like to monitor your recovery process. Our understanding of human healing mechanisms remains incomplete, Shane nodded. Approved, but we'll need to coordinate with the medical center. I should report there immediately for proper treatment. Indeed, Professor Zix agreed. Class, your assignment is to research emergency reduction techniques for various dislocations across the major sentient species. Compare methodologies, success rates, and risk factors. We will discuss your findings next session. As Shane prepared to leave for the medical center, escorted by Professor Zix, Trella the sectoid student stepped forward again. Instructor Reynolds, we often discuss the concept of medical heroism in our ethics seminars. Is this what humans mean by that term, the willingness to endure pain to serve as a teaching example? Shane laughed, then winced as the movement jostled his shoulder. No, Trella, that wasn't heroism, it was probably stubbornness and poor judgment. True medical heroism is providing care to others despite personal risk or hardship. Remember that distinction. The class dispersed slowly, many students still discussing what they'd witnessed. As Shane and Professor Zix walked toward the medical center, the professor's skin shifted to concerned blue tones. That was extremely unwise, Shane. The academy has strict protocols for instructor injuries. I know, Shane admitted. But sometimes the most valuable lessons aren't in the curriculum. Those students just learned something about human physiology they'll never forget. Professor Zix's skin rippled with reluctant agreement. Indeed. Though I suspect what they primarily learned is that humans are even more perplexing than previously thought. The medical center at the academy was a marvel of intergalactic healthcare integration. Designed to accommodate patients from hundreds of species, it featured adaptive environments, specialized equipment, and medical staff with extensive cross-species training. Dr. Levra, the chief physician, was a Taurian whose 4 arms allowed her to operate multiple pieces of equipment simultaneously. Her expression, conveyed through the positioning of her sensory stalks, indicated disapproval as soon as Shane entered. Instructor Reynolds, she said, her voice resonating from the speech membrane at the base of her neck. Professor Zix has already transmitted the preliminary scans. You reduced an anterior shoulder dislocation without medical assistance, in front of students. It became an impromptu teaching opportunity, Shane explained, trying to sound more professional than he felt as the pain medication from the classroom began to wear off. Dr. Levra's stalks quivered in what Shane had learned to recognize as exasperation. Onto the diagnostic platform, please. We need comprehensive imaging, Shane complied, lying back on the platform that immediately adjusted to human physiological requirements. A field of soft blue light enveloped him as sophisticated scanners built a detailed model of his injury. The reduction appears correctly positioned, Doctor. Levra noted, examining the 3-dimensional projection that hovered above the platform. However, there is significant trauma to the surrounding tissues. The anterior labrum shows partial tearing, and there's moderate hemorrhaging within the joint capsule. Professor Zix leaned forward to study the projection. Will surgical intervention be necessary? Not immediately, Dr. Levra replied. Human shoulder joints often respond well to non-invasive treatments following first-time dislocations. However, she added, fixing Shane with a stern look from her primary visual organ, there is approximately a 70% chance of recurrence in human males under 40 standard years who experience traumatic anterior dislocations. Shane sighed. So I'll need to be careful with that arm for. How long? Initial immobilization for 3 weeks, followed by targeted physical therapy to strengthen the supporting musculature. Dr. Levra manipulated the controls, and a section of the ceiling opened to reveal a medical fabrication unit. I'm preparing a specialized sling that will maintain proper positioning while allowing necessary movement for daily activities. The machine hummed softly as it created a custom orthopedic device tailored to Shane's exact measurements. Meanwhile, Dr. Levra administered a more sophisticated pain management treatment than what Professor Zix had provided in the classroom. The medication is species-specific, she explained for Professor Zix's benefit. It targets the pain receptors without compromising cognitive function. Instructor Reynolds will be able to continue teaching, though I'm restricting him from practical demonstrations for the next lunar cycle. Shane felt the relief spreading through his shoulder as the medication took effect. Thank you, doctor, and I apologize for creating an emergency situation. Your medical decisions are not my concern, Dr. Lever replied, her tone neutral. However, as chief physician, I must inform Academy administration about any instructor injury that impacts teaching capabilities. Professor Zix's skin darkened with concern. Is that truly necessary, doctor? The incident has already served an educational purpose. Protocols exist for reasons beyond our individual preferences, Dr. Lever stated firmly. She turned back to Shane as the fabrication unit completed the custom sling. Now, let me demonstrate the proper application of this device. With practiced efficiency, Dr. Levra fitted the sling around Shane's torso and injured arm. Unlike traditional earth slings, this one incorporated smart materials that monitored position, pressure, and healing progress while providing gentle corrective adjustments as needed. The sling will alert you if you move in ways that might compromise healing, she explained. It also contains microstimulators to prevent muscle atrophy during immobilization. Impressive technology, Shane commented, examining the nearly invisible device that somehow managed to hold his arm in a perfectly comfortable position. Standard care, Dr. Lever replied. Now, you'll need to return every 3 days for progress evaluation. The sling will transmit data continuously, but direct assessment remains optimal. As Dr. Levra finalized the treatment plan, the medical center's communication system activated. Dean Orlax, the Academy's administrative head, appeared on the main display screen. The ancient Volarian's features were difficult for most species to read, but the formal positioning of his sensory tendrils indicated official business. Dr. Levra, Professor Zix, Instructor Reynolds. The dean acknowledged each of them. I've received preliminary reports about today's incident. The student communication channels are quite active with discussions of human pain tolerance and emergency medical techniques. Shane winced, not from physical pain this time. Dean Orlax, I take full responsibility for interrupting is considered discourteous in 7 of our 12 member systems, Instructor Reynolds. The dean noted mildly. I was about to say that while your methods were unorthodox and violated safety protocols, the educational impact appears significant. Professor Kailani from Comparative Physiology has requested permission to incorporate recordings of the incident into next semester's curriculum. Professor Zix's skin flushed with surprised yellow tones. You're not reprimanding us. The Academy exists to prepare medical practitioners for the unexpected realities of interspecies healthcare, Dean Orlax replied. Today's incident, while not recommended for repetition, provided valuable insights that controlled demonstrations cannot replicate. The dean's attention focused on Shane. However, Instructor Reynolds, you will complete a comprehensive safety refresher course during your recovery period. And I expect your next lesson plan to include detailed analysis of why attempting self-treatment without proper resources carries significant risks. Understood, Dean, Shane agreed, relieved but chastened. I'll develop that lesson immediately. See that you do, and Dr. Levra, the dean continued, please ensure that Instructor Reynolds receives exemplary care. Human instructors remain difficult to recruit. With that, the communication ended. Dr. Levra turned to Shane with what he had learned to interpret as a wry expression. It seems you've avoided formal disciplinary action, Instructor Reynolds, an outcome some might attribute to luck rather than merit. I completely agree, Shane said humbly, and I appreciate your expertise, Doctor. Save your appreciation for the completion of your recovery, Dr. Levra replied. Now, I'm prescribing a minimum of 24 hours of rest before you return to teaching duties. Professor Zix, can you arrange coverage for tomorrow's classes? Professor Zix's skin rippled affirmatively. Already done. The students could use some time to process what they witnessed today. After receiving detailed care instructions and scheduling follow-up appointments, Shane was released to his quarters in the Academy's residential wing. Professor Zix accompanied him, perhaps concerned that Shane might attempt another ill-advised medical demonstration on the way. "Your quarters have been medically optimized," Professor Zix explained as they walked. "Environmental controls are adjusted for optimal human healing conditions, and the nutrition synthesizer is programmed with recovery-enhancing meal options." Shane nodded gratefully. "Thank you. Though I suspect I won't need much help remembering this lesson." "Indeed," Professor Zix agreed. "However, there is another matter we should discuss. Several students have requested permission to interview you about human pain response mechanisms once you've had adequate rest." "Interview me?" Shane raised an eyebrow. "That's unexpected." "Not entirely. You've provided them with a rare research opportunity." Professor Zix's skin rippled with thoughtful patterns. "Melix has already begun correlating your demonstrated pain tolerance with existing human medical literature. He believes there may be discrepancies worth investigating." Shane considered this as they reached his quarters. "I'm happy to contribute to their research, as long as it doesn't involve any more impromptu demonstrations." "That would be strongly discouraged," Professor Zix assured him, his skin briefly flashing warning red. "Rest now, Shane. Tomorrow will bring many questions from curious minds." After Professor Zix departed, Shane carefully settled into his adaptable resting platform. The sling adjusted automatically as he reclined, maintaining optimal positioning without restricting comfort. His quarters responded to his presence, dimming the lighting and adjusting the temperature to promote healing. Despite the pain medication, his shoulder throbbed dully, a reminder of the day's dramatic events. Shane closed his eyes, replaying the students' reactions in his mind. Their horror had been genuine, a valuable reminder of the vast physiological differences between species that sometimes became abstract in theoretical discussions. The next morning, Shane awoke to find several messages waiting on his communication console. Most were from students, expressing both concern for his well-being and fascination with what they had witnessed. One message in particular caught his attention, a formal research proposal from Melix, Trella, and Vex, requesting his participation in a comparative study of pain response mechanisms across species. Before he could review the proposal in detail, his door alert sounded. Opening the door revealed Melix, the Quasarian student whose 4 stomachs had nearly rebelled during yesterday's demonstration. "Instructor Reynolds," Melix greeted him, all 4 eyes blinking in synchronization. "I apologize for the early visit, but I wish to inquire about your recovery progress." "Much better, thank you," Shane replied, gesturing for Melix to enter. "The Academy's medical technology is impressive." Melix moved into the room with the characteristic undulating gait of his species. "I have brought you something." He extended a container from one of his secondary appendages. "It is a nutritional supplement formulated for human tissue regeneration. My family specializes in xenobiological nutrition science." Shane accepted the container gratefully. "That's very thoughtful, Melix. I didn't realize your family worked in that field." "It is why I chose to study interspecies medicine," Melix explained, settling his massive body onto the reinforced visitor platform. "Our understanding of how different species process nutrients has applications in medicine that remain largely unexplored." Shane carefully opened the container to find what looked like small blue cubes. "How do I take these?" "1 cube dissolved in water, twice daily," Melix instructed. "They contain compounds that support human collagen synthesis and reduce inflammation through metabolic pathways unique to your species." Shane placed the container on his desk. "I'll start today, thank you." He paused, noticing Melix's posture, which indicated he had more to say. Was there something else? Melix's respiratory sacs expanded and contracted in what Shane recognized as a sign of nervousness. "Yes, instructor. We the research group I've formed with Trella and Vex. We believe your demonstration yesterday revealed inconsistencies in our understanding of human pain responses." "I saw your research proposal," Shane acknowledged. It's an interesting concept. The literature suggests humans have moderate pain tolerance compared to many galactic species, Melix continued, gaining confidence. Yet you performed a self-reduction technique that, according to our calculations, should have exceeded the typical human pain threshold by approximately 42%. Shane smiled. Pain isn't just a physiological experience, Melix. There are psychological components that are difficult to quantify. Humans can sometimes push through pain when they have sufficient motivation. That is precisely what we wish to study, Melix said eagerly. The interaction between cognitive determination and physiological limitations. With your permission, we would like to interview you about your experience yesterday and perhaps conduct some non-invasive comparative scans of your neurological responses. Shane considered the request. I'm willing to participate with some conditions. No additional injuries or pain induction, and all research protocols must be approved by both Professor Zix and Dr. Levra. Melix's entire body rippled with excitement. Agreed. We will prepare the proper documentation immediately. He paused, all four eyes focusing intently on Shane. May I ask one preliminary question? Go ahead. When you were reducing your dislocation, what were you thinking about? Where was your focus directed? Shane hadn't expected such a perceptive question. He took a moment to recall the intense experience. I was focusing on the mechanical process, visualizing the joint anatomy, feeling for the right sensations that would indicate proper positioning. By concentrating on the technical aspects, I was able to partially distance myself from the pain. Melix's recording appendage activated, capturing Shane's response. Fascinating. This suggests a potential cognitive override mechanism that might be teachable to other species with sufficient neuroplasticity. Their discussion continued for almost an hour, with Melix asking increasingly insightful questions about human pain perception, cognitive techniques for pain management, and the evolutionary purposes of pain in human development. By the time Melix departed, promising to return with his research colleagues once formal approval was granted, Shane found himself genuinely intrigued by the scientific implications of his impulsive classroom demonstration. Over the next 3 weeks, Shane's recovery progressed steadily. The smart sling adapted to his healing process, gradually allowing more movement as the tissues repaired themselves. Dr. Levra expressed satisfaction with his progress during regular checkups, though she remained professionally detached in her assessments. Meanwhile, the research project initiated by Melix, Trella, and Vex had expanded to include students from 3 different academic departments. With Professor Zix's guidance, they had developed a comprehensive study of pain perception and management across species, with Shane's shoulder dislocation incident as the central case study. 4 weeks after the incident, Shane stood before the same class where he had performed the infamous self-reduction. His shoulder, now free of the sling, had regained most of its mobility, though he was still performing daily exercises to strengthen the supporting muscles. Today, he announced to the attentive students, we're discussing emergency medical decisions in resource-limited environments. As you all witnessed a few weeks ago, sometimes the conventional approach isn't available. The class was notably more engaged than usual. Even the typically distracted Forian students maintained full solidity, their gelatinous forms perfectly still in attention. However, Shane continued, what I demonstrated was not an endorsement of self-treatment. Rather, it highlighted both the capabilities and limitations of emergency care without proper medical resources. Professor Zix, standing at the back of the classroom, nodded approvingly as his skin displayed satisfied blue-green patterns. I've invited a special guest to help with today's lesson, Shane said, gesturing toward the door as it slid open. Dr. Levra has agreed to provide the professional medical perspective on what you witnessed, Dr. Levra entered the classroom, her forearms carrying various diagnostic devices and anatomical models. Students, she acknowledged them with a precise inclination of her sensory stalks. Today, we will analyze the differences between emergency intervention and optimal medical care, using instructor Reynolds' case as our primary example. What followed was one of the most engaging classes of the academic cycle. Dr. Levra and Shane presented a detailed comparison of field emergency techniques versus proper medical protocols, with Professor Zix adding valuable context about how such approaches varied across species. Toward the end of the session, Melix raised an appendage to ask a question. Instructor Reynolds, would you make the same decision again, knowing what you know now about the potential complications and healing time required? The classroom fell silent, all attention focused on Shane. He considered the question carefully. In that exact situation, in a medical teaching facility with proper care immediately available, no, I wouldn't. It was an unnecessary risk. He paused, looking around at the diverse array of students, but the principle remains important. Medical practitioners need to understand that patients may attempt self-treatment before seeking professional care. And sometimes, in truly isolated circumstances where no medical help is available, knowing these emergency techniques could save a life or prevent permanent disability. Dr. Levra's speech membrane vibrated with agreement. Precisely. The art of medicine includes knowing not just what can be done, but what should be done in each unique circumstance. As the class concluded, Shane noticed a newfound respect in how the students regarded him, not because he had endured pain, but because he had transformed his mistake into a valuable learning opportunity. Later that evening, Shane joined Professor Zix and Dean Orlax in the faculty gathering space, where members of different species could socialize in compatible atmospheric conditions. The dean's sensory tendrils were arranged in what Shane had come to recognize as a pleased configuration. The preliminary results from the research initiative sparked by your demonstration are quite promising, Dean Orlax informed him. The Interstellar Medical Council has expressed interest in the findings. That's unexpected, Shane admitted, carefully rotating his shoulder as part of his ongoing rehabilitation exercises. Perhaps not, Professor Zix commented, his skin rippling thoughtfully. The most valuable discoveries often emerge from unplanned events. Still, Shane said, I hope my legacy at the Academy won't be remembered as that human who popped his own arm back in. Dean Orlax's translation unit conveyed something like a chuckle. On the contrary, Instructor Reynolds. Your legacy appears to be inspiring a new approach to interspecies pain management research. The students involved in the project have already applied for extended research funding. Speaking of students, Professor Zix interjected, next cycle's enrollment in human physiological studies has increased by 37%. It seems your dramatic demonstration has sparked interest in human medicine. Shane shook his head, smiling ruefully. Not exactly how I plan to boost enrollment, but I'll take it. As they continued their discussion, Shane reflected on how a moment of poor judgment had transformed into something unexpectedly positive. The pain had been temporary, but the educational impact would continue long after his shoulder had completely healed. One final matter, Dean Orlax said, his tendrils shifting to a more formal arrangement. The Academy Board has reviewed the incident report and your subsequent contributions to the research initiative. They have approved your application for the Advanced Xenophysiology teaching position opening next cycle. Shane blinked in surprise. He had applied for the position months ago, but had assumed his recent misadventure would disqualify him. Thank you, Dean. I'm honored and somewhat surprised. The board values instructors who can turn adversity into opportunity, Dean Orlax explained. Though they did add a stipulation that all future demonstrations must receive prior medical approval. A reasonable precaution, Shane agreed with a laugh that, for the first time in weeks, didn't cause any pain in his shoulder. As the evening concluded, Shane found himself surrounded by a small group of students who had been waiting to speak with him. Melix, Trella, Vex, and several others approached with evident excitement. Instructor Reynolds, Melix began, all four eyes blinking rapidly, we've received preliminary approval for our expanded research project. The Interstellar Medical Council has assigned a senior research coordinator to our team. Congratulations, Shane said sincerely. Your hard work deserves recognition. Trella stepped forward, her mantis-like form moving with precise grace. We wish to acknowledge your contribution as the catalyst for this research. Without your demonstration, we might never have questioned the established literature on interspecies pain response mechanisms. Sometimes the best teaching happens by accident, Shane replied. Though please don't use that as an excuse to dislocate any joints. The gathering of students made various sounds that their respective species considered laughter. As they discussed their research plans, Shane realized that his painful experience had created something valuable, a bridge of understanding between species with vastly different physiologies, but a shared commitment to healing. In the months that followed, Shane's shoulder regained full functionality. The research initiated by his students developed into a comprehensive study that would eventually influence pain management protocols throughout the 12 systems. And though new students sometimes whispered about the human instructor who fixed his own arm, Shane found that the story served as a useful reminder of the complex interplay between theory and practice in medicine. What had begun as a moment of pain witnessed in horror by alien students had transformed into something neither Shane nor his students could have anticipated: a deeper understanding of the resilience that all sentient beings could display when faced with physical adversity, and the unique ways in which different species experienced and overcame pain. As Shane prepared for his first lecture as advanced xenophysiology instructor, he smiled at the irony. His most effective teaching moment had come not from careful preparation, but from an accident and his impulsive response to it. It was a lesson he wouldn't forget, though. Next time, he would definitely use the hovering step platform when reaching for high shelves.